I'm David Jernigan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health, Behavior, and Society here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm also the director of the Center on Alcohol Marketing and Youth at the school, which is funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
And I'm Brian Simpson, editor of Johns Hopkins Public Health magazine. We're here today to talk with Dr. Jernigan about alcohol problems on college campuses. Dr. Jernigan, let's begin. The statistics on alcohol-related problems on college campuses are really alarming. Can you give us a few snapshots?
Sure. The National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism just released its latest estimates this spring. Roughly 1,825 deaths a year on college campuses as a result of alcohol use. Close to 600,000 injuries that are alcohol-related. Estimated, those are the first-hand effects, but the second-hand effects are really substantial. Close to 700,000 incidents of a student being hit or assaulted by a drinking student, and about 97,000 incidents, victims of alcohol-related sexual assault or date rape.
The statistics are pretty frightening. I don't think the public at large really recognizes the scope of the problem.
This is a subset of the larger challenge we deal with alcohol, in that alcohol has become normalized in so many parts of our society. It is particularly normalized as part of the American college experience. It varies by part of the country, but certainly the images of Animal House, the association of college with freedom, including freedom to get completely wasted and trash your fraternity house, those are strong and powerful, enduring images in our society. But it is a big problem, and our data on how big the problem is gets stronger and stronger. This increases our ability to show that it is a problem and hopefully get people to do some of the things that are more effective in dealing with it.
One other statistic that really astounded me was from a 2003 JAMA study that said that estimated that youth aged 12 to 20 drink nearly 20% of the alcohol consumed in the U.S. each year, and that to me is incredible.
Yeah, the statistic varies depending on which survey you're extrapolating from, but it's somewhere between 12 and 20% of the population, somewhere between 1 out of 8 and 1 out of 5 drinks consumed is consumed by an underage drinker. Now, how does this happen? Well, it relates to what I said before about adults not taking this issue seriously. Every underage drinker is either getting that alcohol from an adult who bought it legally or from somebody underage who's buying it illegally, but most of it is somehow coming from adults. For the younger kids, it tends to be, taking something out of the parents' liquor cabinet or something, but once we get into the college age, 18 to 20, it is much more likely either to be coming from a commercial establishment, which is selling illegally or serving illegally, or from what are called Confederate buys, from the younger students getting the older students to buy alcohol for them and furnish it to them.
Mm-hmm. Now, opponents of the minimum legal drinking age of 21 in the U.S. will point to statistics like that and say, use that as proof that 21 doesn't work. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, ironically, our ability to document the problem better works against us in this conversation, in that our data is stronger and stronger about how bad the problem is. And that said, the best that we can tell from the data we've got is that the problem actually has gotten better. Certainly, the principal thing that 21 was supposed to address, which is the deaths of young people on the nation's highways as a result of drinking and driving, have fallen precipitously since 1982. Actually, since 1989, when the whole country went under 21 as a purchase age. And this fall among young people is substantially greater than the fall among adults. So we would credit that to 21. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates about 20,000 lives have been saved as a result of that law. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, I would argue that 21 hasn't worked nearly as well as we want it to. And the reason it hasn't worked is because it kind of hangs out there all by itself. It's expected to do the entire job of reducing underage drinking when in fact there's so much more that needs to be done. As long as 21 is out of sync with the messages that young people are getting from advertising, from how we price alcohol, from how available it is, from the degree to which alcohol has, as I said, become normalized, become a quote-unquote necessary part of every form of celebration, those are very powerful messages to young people. If we want 21 to work, we need to line up as a society behind the basic message that we don't want underage people to drink.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about how the highway deaths have fallen because of the 21. What about other statistics, other areas compared with, it's like 20 or 30 years ago? I mean, are things better or worse?
We have a very interesting study that just came out that looked at data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. It's a survey that's changed its methodology several times, so nobody had really done this trend analysis before. But looking over the last 30 years, the study found that 21 clearly had an effect on 18 to 20-year-olds who were not in college. That group has decreased its consumption considerably since the passage of 21. Hasn't had much effect on college students, and even their two different trends had some effect on the males, but the females are going in the opposite direction. And this relates to what I said before. Alcohol use has become greatly normalized among young women. This relates to the promotion of alcohol, to a decision by distilled spirits companies in the late 90s. They were losing too much ground to beer. They decided they wanted to level the playing field. Part of how they've done that is to create whole categories of drinks that are appealing to young women. Viewing young women as the group that underconsumes, if you will, from a marketer's perspective, then that was the growth area, and we're seeing the effects.
I think a lot of us, when we think of underage drinking, we just think of teens drinking beer. But liquor and distilled spirits, that's really quite a large proportion of it.
This is a big surprise from the most recent data that we're getting. Folks like me watching the marketing activities have suspected that this could happen. But what's happened is for decades, literally, beer was the beverage of choice for underage drinkers. That's changing. Liquor is now showing up in our surveys as the beverage of choice, and the girls are the ones who are leading the way.
Wow. Let's take a look at another comparison. U.S. Sort of underage drinking or under 21 drinking and their European counterparts. I think a lot of times in the U.S. we think, well, the Europeans don't have the real minimum legal drinking age laws, and so the kids kind of grow up sipping alcohol and they don't binge like the U.S. students do. Is that true, or is there any truth to that or not?
It's wishful thinking. It may be true still in some parts of Italy. It's certainly not true anymore in Spain and the center cities on the weekends. There are alcohol-fueled parties that are creating major problems. France, something of a divide between north and south, with southern France still somewhat more likely to drink the way that you're describing. But overall, we have comparable data between the U.S. and 31 European countries. The data is about the drinking patterns of 15 and 16-year-olds, roughly our 10th graders. What those data show is that 21 has been hugely successful in the U.S. in decreasing the prevalence, that is, the likelihood that a young person in the U.S. will drink. We're less likely than any of those countries to have our 10th graders drinking alcohol. And the European countries that follow us are the three that have 20 as a minimum drinking age. When it comes to binge drinking, the picture's a little different because binge drinking is dictated by the cultural pattern of drinking in a society. And so 11 of the 31 countries are actually less likely to have the rates of binge drinking that we have among our 10th graders, but 21 of them have worse binge drinking problems than we have.
Hmm. And what do you say to people who make the argument that in the U.S. young people can join the Army at age 18, they can vote, but they can't drink a beer?
Look, we have lots of different ages of majority in this country. We have 16 as the age of sexual majority. We have 18 for tobacco. We have 21 for alcohol. We have 25 in many states for renting a car or renting a hotel room by yourself. The point is there is no consistency there. We're constantly in a public debate around these issues. I like to see this dictated more by the evidence and more by biology than by opinion or sentiment. And what we're learning about the alcohol in the developing adolescent brain causes many of us to conclude with great relief that 21 was a very wise step, in that it's clear that the brain keeps on developing up until the early 20s. It's also clear that heavy alcohol use during adolescence interferes with the developing brain. This interference shows up on test scores, a roughly 10% decrement between a heavy drinking teen and a non-drinking teen in basic skills or memory tests. This is tests that have been done 6 weeks after the heavy drinking teen went into treatment, became sober. So at least that long a term detrimental effects. The important thing about the brain in adolescence, even up to the early 20s, is that the part of the brain associated with positive reward, with risk-taking, develops faster than the part of the brain that is sort of the executive decision-making, the judgment part of the brain. So adolescence is a vulnerable time. It's a time of opportunity. It is a time of experimentation, of greater willingness to take risks. So with highly risky products like alcohol, it makes biological sense for us to delay initiation as long as possible. We also find that the longer kids wait to drink, the less likely they are to suffer from alcohol-related consequences. Kids who start drinking before 15 are 4 times more likely to become alcohol dependent than those who wait until they're 21. 7 times more likely to be in an alcohol-related motor vehicle crash. 11 times more likely to be in a physical fight after drinking. The trajectory of alcohol use in this country is that the incidence of the onset of alcohol dependence, that is, when the first signs of being addicted show up, that peaks at age 18. If you're not addicted by age 25, the chances of becoming addicted are incredibly small. This is why increasingly we call alcohol addiction a developmental disease.
And so so what do you see in terms of teens drinking? Does that actually sort of set the patterns, or can it predict what their later life will be and if problems?
It does. I mean, that's what the research shows. The things that impact young people's drinking trajectory, certainly parents drinking is incredibly powerful as a predictor. If the parents drink heavily, binge drink, the young person is much more likely to binge drink. Also, very interestingly, the amount of alcohol marketing in a young person's media market turns out to have an impact on their drinking trajectory. One study has did a longitudinal, following a cohort of young people in 30 different media markets in the U.S., found that those with high rates of alcohol ad spending per capita, the young people drinking increased through adolescence and kept drinking through age 25, which is when the study stopped. The young people with lower rates of per capita spending on alcohol marketing, the drinking peaked at age 22, 23, and then started to taper off.
Wow.
So environmental factors are important, as are family and peer issues.
Mm-hmm. Seems to be a lesson in marketing and in public health there.
That's right. And, there's so much we can do from a public health perspective to prevent this problem. That's the great irony here. We actually know what can be effective, but mostly the political will is lacking to do it.
Well, that will actually be the topic of our next conversation. We'll be looking at solutions. in alcohol and drinking problems in college campuses. So thank you very much, Dr. Jernigan, and we'll be back very soon.
Thanks for having me.